My name's Simon Savage and I'm one of the project managers at Libraries Connected, and I'm thrilled to be hosting this Black Stories Matter promoting diverse content, which is the first of a series of events that we're going to be doing and webinars that we're going to be doing as Libraries Connected. Before I introduce our fantastic panel, I just wanted to say this is being filmed. Also, if you can be on mute, we will be opening to questions, and once the question goes out, you can then unmute yourself to ask it. For those of you who don't know, Libraries Connected is the membership organisation taking a leading role in the development of public libraries through advocating for the power of libraries, sharing best practice and helping to shape the public library service now and in the future. And for this webinar, we have a fantastic lineup. It's all the S's. We've got Sarah Collins, who is the author of the incredible Confessions of Franny Langton, which is winner of the Costa First Novel Award 2019, shortlisted for the Florey Prize, the HWA Crown Awards and the Diversity Awards. It's here, it's amazing. Make sure you have it in your libraries. We then have Charmaine Lovegrove, who's the publisher of Dialogue Books, which I'm sure she'll tell you all about. She's published some incredible books. I have 3 here, which you should all, again, be stocking in your libraries. We've got Remembered by Yvonne Battle-Pelton, we've got Rainbow Milk by Paul Mendes, and we've also got The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. So if you've not got those, get to them. Charmaine's also previously been a literary editor for Elle and a bookshop owner, so I'm sure she'll talk about that in due course. And then we also have Samantha Williams, who's the founder of the double award-winning Book Club Carnival and online shop, which is now into its 4th year of travelling the country. Well, possibly not right now, but maybe you can talk about that a little bit more, Samantha, for us in due course. So the way it's going to go is I'm going to ask each of our panellists to talk about something around libraries and Black Stories Matter and how we can work to make the voices of Black people and other diverse groups more known. And then we'll have some questions from me and then go over to your lovely questions in the comments. We'd also love to hear any of your learnings or any thoughts that you've got or any ideas of how we can shape these going forward. But before all that, Sarah, I would love you to kind of talk about how libraries have shaped you as a reader and an author. I know that you've been to Liverpool Library and done some research and stuff like that, but also how you think libraries can work to amplify diverse stories and writing.
Thank you so much, Simon, and for that lovely introduction. Before I do, I just want to say hello to everyone. This is really surreal being with a few hundred people virtually. But since my novel was published, I haven't really been able to get used to the experience of being with a few hundred people, even in the same room. It still seems to me so incredible to have joined the conversation. I like to think of it as a conversation between reader and writer, as a writer, because growing up, writers really were my superheroes. I used to joke with my brothers about the fact that they knew everything about football players, but in the same way, I knew everything about writers. I felt like they had stats. I felt like I could understand them and be obsessed with them in the same way that my brothers were with their sports heroes. And it started for me in a library. It didn't quite start when I was 4 years old, but my love affair with books started when I was 4 years old. What happened to me when I was 4 is that my parents made me an immigrant. And I always put it that way because children don't choose to immigrate. It's something that happens to you, like almost everything in life when you're a child, because you have very little control of where you go and what you do. My parents left Jamaica and we emigrated to Grand Cayman, which is a very small island where Jamaicans were not very welcome, which is the case with Jamaicans in many parts of the world. And so we grew up in a really tiny village on this very small island where my brothers and I remember this very distinctly, even at the age of 4, were yelled at by our neighbors and, told things like "Black Jamaican monkeys grow home." And that was my growing up experience. One of my very early memories is the feeling of alienation. But there was a tiny island, a tiny library on this small island, and I call it a library, but it was really a room. It was one room, and it was full of books and air conditioning, which is very important when you're growing up in the Caribbean. And around about the age of 10, my parents started dropping me off there on a Saturday, or I would make my own way there. And I found a home. I really did. Before that, I had found a home in books. But then I found a place where all of the books I could ever want to have access to were kept. And I felt comforted by this feeling of reading surrounded by books, because I knew I wasn't going to run out. The other really important thing in a small island is that you can't buy books, and you couldn't in the 80s when I was growing up. Small islands are supposed to breed small ambitions. You know, the message that we get in small islands is that you don't go on to do great things. People like me didn't go on to become published lawyers. It just wasn't accessible. But what happened between the bookshelves of that library was I wandered the world, and everything that had happened in the world or could have happened in it, everything felt close. Everything felt potentially within my reach. I learned about sex in the library. You know, I snuck out a copy of Hollywood Wives and Barbara Cartland romances. I sat in the kids section for a long time, longing to get into the adult section for those books, and then sneaking in to get them when the librarian wasn't looking. I learned about womanhood. I learned about race. I wasn't at first interested in all of that stuff because it seemed too serious and it seemed too weighty. But I discovered Alice Walker and I discovered Toni Morrison. And I know I would not have become a writer had I not had the example, not only of people like me doing it, but actually doing it in a way which was universally recognized. It's almost impossible for me to imagine what would have become of me had I not had access to that building on my tiny island. But I think one thing is for sure, that I would never have imagined life beyond the boundaries of my tiny island. I just wouldn't have had access to fiction, and therefore I wouldn't have had access to the power of the imagination. And I really do believe, I firmly believe that it's political. I believe that allowing access to libraries means that people who come from supposedly nowhere places like I did can go anywhere, and that when there is an attempt to defund libraries, that's an attempt to prevent people from going somewhere. I'll leave it with that political statement for now, but as you can see, I have lots and lots to say about them.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Charmaine, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about Dialogue Books, where you see the publishing industry at the moment and how maybe publishing and libraries can work together more.
Sure, and again, thank you so much for having me, and hi to all of the librarians. I also share the sentiment that without libraries, then I wouldn't be who I am or doing the job that I do. I'm from Battersea, and so my home libraries were Northcote Road Library, Balham Library, Battersea Library, Carnegie Library in Herne Hill, and also I've lived in Bristol recently, so my child's library has been Bedminster Library. So for me, with Dialogue Books, having started as a bookseller, what was really, really clear is that readers at the very heart of everything that we do. And I was just writing a mission statement about Dialogue today, and it's just, for me, the most important thing is that my job is about connecting authors with readers, and sometimes as an industry we forget that. And when I was a bookseller, I always found it really interesting that I was sort of made to feel like I was on the peripheries of the industry. But then when I became a publicist and only working on a few books, then I was sort of propelled more into the center of it. And now that I'm a publisher and right into the center and sort of the highest gatekeeper within the industry, then I've never forgotten my roots at all, and ensure that readers are central to everything that we do at Dialogue. So I think the thing that's really core about that for librarians is to also to see yourselves as being an integral part of the publishing industry and not something that's separate. And often when I speak to libraries, or when I'm writing about on Twitter or something about independent bookshops, people are like, and libraries too. And I'm like, but anything that's talking about connecting with readers is kind of the same thing. And if you, as librarians, continue to see yourselves as separate to the industry and separate to the needs of readers, because there's not a financial or contractual relationship, then I think that that's like a huge shame. So some ways that I think that you can really help fulfill that space that readers are really looking for is thinking kind of beyond the demographic of the people who visit your libraries. So as a child, when I went to the library, one of the things that was really important to me was I wasn't necessarily looking for people or books that really like mirrored my own experience of the world. I was actually looking for stories that were about diversifying and understanding the world from a different perspective. And people that had incredibly different ranges from me were kind of the center of my interest. And I think one of the things that we have to remember at all times, that especially in libraries, people are going because they are, I mean, you know this better than I do, but the range of the demographics and the reason that people are going is much greater than, say, the people that visit a bookshop. And so therefore, a lot of those people are looking for whether they're children or adults or gay or straight or black or white or young or old, abled or disabled. They're looking for experiences outside of their own, and they've specifically made a journey to your library to be told about something that is outside of their own experience. And so therefore it's imperative that rather than looking at the demographic of the area that you're in, which Britain is a majority white country, is a majority middle to lower class country, people are economically deprived. And so instead of just looking for books and bringing in books that will perpetuate that idea and those stereotypes, I think it's really, really vital that librarians are thinking of themselves as being part of the publishing industry and thus reaching out to publicists, checking on what we're talking about on Twitter, following us on Instagram, and thinking, what is it that the conversation that's happening nationally that my readers will be interested in the same way that readers come into libraries to look at newspapers or to go on the internet to kind of find out what's happening in the world. They're also using that space for books. And I know that you're really aware of this as readers, but the fact is that we're having this conversation today because there has been a sort of a lack there has been a lack of engagement with the industry and also with a range of reading material. So I think the first thing that you can do as librarians is totally feel empowered as people who are a relevant and really important part of the publishing industry that starts with the author and ends with the reader. And without you, we don't actually have an industry. And so I just want to say thank you for the work that you do and acknowledge how important that is.
Thank you very much, Charmaine. That was brilliant. Samantha, in terms of book club, how, you know, we're looking at how we want libraries to promote more diverse books. You've done that with book club. What have kind of been the barriers? What tips might you give, and how could you see that libraries could you know, have this more diverse, wide range of books?
Hi everyone. I think libraries are really interesting spaces. They're purely democratic in that everyone can go. The doors are always open, and I think that's something to be celebrated. But I think there's sometimes a disconnect with regards to what people perhaps find when they go through those doors. Perhaps it's, you know, the idea is that it's this free space where everyone can come and everyone can kind of pick the books that they want off the shelf. But often I find that, you know, the content or the books in the library don't often perhaps reflect the needs of the people, particularly when it comes to content that is more multicultural or more multilingual or more diverse, or, you know, whatever terminology we're using. I mean, my relationship with libraries is kind of multifaceted. I'm a parent, so I have 3 young children, and I used to take them to the library quite a lot for things like rhyme time, and I used it in that capacity. My other relationship with libraries, unfortunately, is quite narrow and quite small, and that's something that I have been really trying to change for a long time. In my capacity as a bookseller and going into schools and meeting lots of parents and doing events, I often meet librarians who come to my stall and they absolutely love the range of books that I have. Multicultural books, multilingual, you name it, from all over the world. And they always say, how can we get hold of these books? How can we find these books? And I think that there's something in that area that's broken. And it's something to do with this very kind of complex chain of how books get into libraries. And it's quite a boring conversation about that supply chain, but it's actually really, really practical. And it could be really easy if you can somehow take down and break down some of those barriers. Because I've got the books, I've got the relationships with the publishers, but I can't get them into the libraries. But then you have the people who are attending the libraries that want to get hold of those books. So for someone like me who perhaps isn't well versed in the machinations of all of this, I'm willing and keen, but the obstacles are huge. So if that's just my experience, I wonder what other booksellers or other book suppliers, perhaps that do focus on more multicultural content, are also facing in terms of trying to diversify library content. So I think, for me, I sometimes struggle with that because I would like to facilitate libraries and I would like to serve them, because they are such important spaces. And so many of my customers go to libraries but do not find the books that I have. So I think there's a bigger conversation there to be had about supplies and that kind of those kind of practical steps as to how to get into a library if you're a new business.
What sort of tips for any barriers that you've encountered might you give to libraries at the moment? Sort of any immediate tips, I guess.
Tips for librarians? In what? How do you mean? In what sense?
In terms of how they can find the more diverse books, so that they can be those places that people can come to, I guess.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think that in terms of supplying libraries, from what I understand, I can only talk about my own experience. And when I have tried to supply books to libraries, I'm often met with a standardized response, which is, we can't take books from small independent people like you because your books they're not library ready. They don't have the barcodes, they don't have the plastic jackets, they're not prepared, and we've got a contract with this particular company over here, and that's who we get our books from. And when you try and unpick that, the answer is, well, no, we've got a contract with them and that's just how it is. Where do you go from there? So, you know, I can't do anything then. So in terms of offering tips, I think the tips really are for librarians to go back to basics and start looking at their suppliers and perhaps looking outside the box and coming to smaller independent grassroots suppliers like myself, who have their ear to the ground and know what the community wants and needs, and knows how to get those books, and is not just kind of looking through a catalogue and ticking, but actually is feeling and smelling and seeing and tasting these books and talking to customers and knowing, like what Charmaine said, being really tapped in to social media and to conversations online about what is current and about what people want. I think that's really important. But just on that point, it's not all doom and gloom, because I have had some fantastic relationships with libraries, particularly a shout out to Balham Library. Librarians who call me up and say, come in, book love, and do a takeover of our library. Now that's unheard of. That's a forward thinking librarian who's saying to me, come and do a takeover. I mean, that's pretty ambitious stuff. So I go in as a commercial kind of outfit to sell books in a library space. And even then, perhaps some people might say, well, that's a conflict of interest. But actually, if you're bringing a different audience, or perhaps a bigger, more diverse audience into the library, you're kind of using that library space in maybe perhaps a bit more interesting and dynamic way. Not to say that libraries aren't already dynamic and interesting places, but in the context of this conversation, we're talking about how to broaden that. And I think, you know, Balham Library, Lucinda particularly, has done wonderful work with that, and also Clapham Library, where they've invited me in. I think librarians could perhaps look at that model, but perhaps, I don't know if there's a conflict there with sales versus borrowing. It's complicated.
It is. I think that's really interesting to hear that from you, and that's maybe something that Libraries Connected, as the company that we are, can kind of help with at some point, is how do we get libraries to be in touch with these smaller independent suppliers. I know when I was working at Liverpool Central Library, we would have events on and have indie booksellers come in and sell books while we also borrow books. And I think that's something I wanted to ask you as well, actually, and also Charmaine, as a previous bookseller, do you think there is, in a post-pandemic world, which hopefully is going to be sooner rather than later, an opportunity for booksellers and libraries to work more hand in hand?
Yeah, I mean, you know, recently, last year, Dialogue, we did a tour, so my imprint, which focuses on writers from marginalised backgrounds, including Black, Asian, marginalised ethnic, LGBTQI+, disabled and working class writers. We did a tour around the country, and one of the things we did was go to lots of libraries, and we had booksellers in the libraries as well as book borrowers in the library, so people had a choice. So it wasn't exclusionary at all. And I think that's also really important to recognise that people can do, it's such a unique thing with a book that you can kind of do one, you don't have to do one or the other, you can do both. You can choose to borrow books, but you can also choose to buy them. Sorry, my puppy is... And so such a publishing person with my dog, right? But the thing is that I find really, really interesting, kind of about seeing the discussion on the side, is kind of thinking about the supply chain. Now, here's the deal. You can say whatever about the supply chain, and if that's then the reason that you're not getting diverse books, then obviously that needs to be something that you're looking at. However, you are the supply chain, because you're the people who are deciding what goes in. If you're telling people, I have seen this book, I think my readers want to read it, then you will have to find a way of getting it, because there's no reason why, I can't really understand why one type of book can be more, that especially if it's published by a mainstream publisher like Hachette or Penguin Random House, I don't see why one type of book would be more accessible than another type of book. So before everyone kind of keeps going on with talking about the supply chain, I want to sort of just quash that, because I just think that's a really good excuse to kind of, it's somebody else's problem, and it isn't actually, because all these books are like really readily available, especially books by diverse writers. Somebody else in the comments said about being about your demographic and the people that community that you serve. And actually, I think it's really important to do the opposite, and to stretch your readers of the demographic beyond what it is that you have decided that they would like to read, and to push them further into reading about other lives. I do not think that there is such thing as like a reading demographic or a type of person that reads one type of book. I think people just read what's available to them. And I think it's a very dangerous thing to continue to perpetuate an idea that because somebody is from some place that what they want to read is this. That's like not at all what diversity or inclusion is about. It's about saying there's no reason why a 70-year-old white man who's working class wouldn't want to read Beloved by Toni Morrison, and there's no reason that a young black man wouldn't want to read Doris Lessing. You know, like that's where we're going with this. This is what inclusion means rather than kind of diversity. And I just sort of take that point really, really seriously, and as a great point of responsibility to all librarians.
Could I just echo that as strongly as I can? I am always baffled by this idea that reading happens in silos or in segregated ways, that because I'm Black, I'm writing for a particular kind of reader or read only a particular kind of books. The reason that reading appeals to me and always has is precisely because it's a means of connecting and a means of understanding, a means of reaching out. And in fact, my absolute favorite reader interaction since I had my book published was a message I received from a 96-year-old guy who had spent his life at sea, had never had any formal education, but had learned to read, was obsessed with reading, and said his book was, my book was his second favorite. I can't actually now remember which was the first, I've blocked it out. The second favorite he'd ever read in his life. I went on to meet him, and we have kept in touch. And to me, that is the magic. And if it hadn't been for a librarian back in my past connecting me with all kinds of writers, including Jackie Collins, I wouldn't be a writer. So I think I couldn't agree more with Charmaine that it is a real shame if we are providing books to a certain demographic or with a certain demographic in mind, because then all we're doing is fulfilling expectations that we have nothing in common. And actually books blast those expectations out of the water.
That's a really brilliant point from both of you. And just to say, if there's any suppliers that are here who would like to talk about what it's like for them, we'd really, really be keen to hear from them. So let us know. I just wanted to ask, do you think, and this can go to all of you, Samantha, Sarah and Charmaine, that there is a place for libraries to help engage with publishers on the writers, the diverse writers of the future? Because I think as community hubs, as well as places where there are books, there's that potential there. Would you agree?
Yeah, I definitely 100% agree with that. I think, look, you know, we're in a really dire situation. Like, I've moved from the UK back to Berlin because I would like to remain European. We have one of the worst, most right-wing governments that we've had in a long time. The cuts to libraries are abysmal and have been over the last 10 years. And without wanting to sound like a millennial, you know, innovation is really, really important, but but innovation shouldn't be something that's really scary. It should just be something that you're doing because we all need to adapt to survive. We all need to change. You know, when ebooks first came out, we thought that would be the end of it. And look, you can even borrow ebooks from libraries now. Like, it's really amazing how when you innovate, the great things that can come up. I think that there is definitely, you know, to have creative writing courses held at libraries, I just think would just be an absolutely incredible thing. You don't necessarily have to have like a famous author or professor that's hosting them. You actually just need to read some books, like Will Storr's book on storytelling or Stephen King's book on storytelling. You know, there's lots of really great resources out there that can help. And I think the thing is that's really interesting to me with libraries is kind of, this kind of not being sorry, my dog is just like biting me. Not being afraid of taking on that innovation and getting some young people in, getting some old people in, mixing it all up. not just kind of putting a label on, like, I know today is sort of about making, how do we get more Black writers, but I really believe in inclusion above everything else. Like, to me, inclusion is sort of the most important thing, and the more that we can get a range of different people together talking about their writing, talking about the reading, the better it is for everyone else. I'm just going to put.
What about you, Sarah? Because obviously you've mentioned that libraries were so key.
I was actually going to ask if you could repeat the question, Simon, because I didn't hear it the first time. Can you repeat it before I answer? I think you have to unmute, though.
The joys, I think that's the hashtag of 2020 is going to be, you're on mute. So, no, I was just asking, in terms of libraries as spaces of having that relationship with publishers to help find the new talent that's coming forward, and also as a way of enticing people who might not come into a library normally. Would you agree that that's an opportunity?
I think libraries are already set up to find the new talent. If there's one, you know, as the sort of mayor author on the panel, if there's one message I can keep banging on about, it is that, you know, there will be a future Booker Prize winner who is a kid heading into a library somewhere, you know, at some point, interacting with a librarian or an English teacher or someone who is going to shape that love of reading. I actually find it, I'm going to be honest, I find it quite remarkable that we even have to have the diversity conversation. And I've said this, you know, on a number of panels. I think it's because I moved to England, and so, but from a Caribbean background, and we don't have to talk about diversity in the Caribbean because it just is. And that means diversity. You know, I don't just read Black writers, so I don't understand white readers who only just read white writers, or straight readers who only just read straight writers. It seems to me that it would be unnatural, that you have to force yourself to do that. That if you're a reader, you already have an appetite for the world. And so I am not sure why, if we're all in this because we love reading, why it isn't already programmed into us to go in search of the diverse stories. But I do think, and I say this about publishing as well, that things only change when the decision makers change. We've talked a lot about supply chains, but I haven't heard a lot of talk about who is running libraries and who is placing the orders and whether there is diversity at that level. I'm not an expert on it, but if it reflects the publishing industry, then I imagine the decision makers and the gatekeepers are not yet diverse. And so perhaps, and I think it's an advantage. The advantage of coming from a so-called marginalized background is you have to pay attention to the world. When you come, the more privilege you have, I think, the less attention you pay. And so maybe the range of subjects you're interested in or people you're interested in hearing from narrows, and I think that's a loss. But the minute you open up the gatekeeping to people from all kinds of backgrounds, naturally you start finding superstars from all kinds of backgrounds. They go hand in hand as far as I can see. And it should be natural. It really should. A love of reading should already be promoting that recognition of how much we have in common and how much stronger we are when we pull on those similarities, even in spite of our diverse backgrounds.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Sarah. I'm just wondering if Janice from Balham, I believe, is here. And I wonder if she would be okay to talk a little bit about how she's worked with Samantha and how that has all happened. Because I think that would be really, really interesting for everyone, if that's all right with you, Janice.
Lucinda. It was Lucinda from Balham.
Oh, sorry. Is Lucinda from Balham here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hello.
Sorry.
It's okay. Janice is another Wandsworth librarian who's also here, I believe, but isn't right here in Balham right now. Yeah, I have been incredibly lucky to have been able to work with Samantha, really. We did the carnival in the library last October, and not only was she able to come in, bring some phenomenal books, bring amazing authors with her, and flags and dolls and all sorts of fantastic things, but we were also able to use that to buy books from her at the event as well for the libraries. And I mean, I agree with pretty much everything that has been said. Our suppliers are not the best. We also tend to use our suppliers as an excuse. And librarians are, by and large, more inclined to be white, straight, middle class and able-bodied than not. That's a thing that I'm very aware of when I'm buying for a library as a children's librarian. But it's also a thing which sometimes having to find ways to work around feels complicated. And being able to work with Samantha on that and leave with a huge pile of exciting books that we could process internally and could get onto the shelves was really fantastic.
But that's very unusual.
Yes.
And I think that, and I often worry that when these beautiful things happen, it's really down to the goodwill of one person who's put in the extra work to make that happen. And we don't have a Lucinda in every library across the country. You know, I can only talk about my experience, but as a woman of colour, approaching librarians, trying to get books into libraries, it's been tough. And that's the truth. And I am in no position to take on the machine that is trying to get books into libraries as much as I would like to. I'm taking on lots of other things at the moment, but I would love to.
You shouldn't have to. Like, it shouldn't be on you.
No,
it should be on us. No.
It shouldn't. But the point is, it's a systematic thing, and it's how do we break those structures down and those walls down. You just can't overnight. There's a lot of money in books, and there's a big market share, and there's certain organisations and companies that dominate that, and they're tied into contracts, and contracts keep people like me out, and other suppliers out. So if we want to have some really frank conversations, sometimes it might be a little bit uncomfortable. But these are the conversations that we need to start having. Get rid of the contracts, open the door, let's start again.
And do you feel, Lucinda, that Libraries Connected could help in any way with that? Is there a possibility of that? I'm just looking as you know, we are here as a membership service for all libraries.
I don't want this conversation to be completely dominated by looking at contractors, but the suggestions that were popping up along with working to pressure some of the bigger companies like Askew's to actually improve their selection both of like multicultural books, multilingual books, and other minority representation. And things like the lists they create when they come out are terrible a lot of the time. And I say that with a lot of respect, but also they had a transphobic book in their LGBT list. Why would you do that? And so I think having a group where we can work together and pressure people together, start putting pressure on suppliers, would be really useful. But it's not the be all and end all, and there are other things that I think libraries need to be aware of and need to do as well in and of themselves.
That's really helpful, Lucinda, thank you. And also thank you for all you're doing. I think it's really important that we say that because it sounds like you're doing a corking job. I do believe we have Joanna Ellis, who is happy to talk to us, who is from a supplier. She may now be slightly fearful, but it would be really, really interesting, Joanna, if you could, to talk about anything that you've experienced or any ways that you think the conversation needs to go and who with.
I think, okay, so first of all, let me preface this by saying I'm freelance. I do collection development work for an ebook and audiobook platform, so Biblioteca Cloud Library, which most of you will probably know as sort of being in the mix with Overdrive and Belinda and RB Digital. So we offer a service, and I do the sort of pre-curation, if you like. And I think this conversation is really important and really relevant because I think there are lots of different challenges for suppliers and with suppliers. And part of the challenge is with ebooks and audiobooks is libraries work with often more than one. They often offer more than one solution for their users. And that is often born of the fact that each platform has access to slightly different content. And so I think suppliers are constantly trying to get access to as wide a range of content as possible. That is our broad policy. I mean, I'm sure it's our my competitor's broad policy as well. But I do completely hear Book Love about the fact that being locked in with any supplier comes with massive risk, which is that you don't get, you know, the full range that you might otherwise get. So I think I also understand the pressure that libraries are under, which is that, you know, with cuts, including to time, people have probably become a bit more reliant on supplier selections with less time left, you know, to develop their own collections in a way that maybe people would like to. So that's sort of my thinking about it. But I've been thinking a lot. I mean, I know we've done a lot of work around what we call equity, diversity and inclusion, trying to create as broader collections as possible. I also absolutely buy into the argument about mirrors rather than windows rather than mirrors. I think we need a wide range of books for a wide range of people so that people have choice. I think there's an element of being able, and then I think it becomes very much about what you present to people, what you recommend to people. I think librarian recommendations are incredibly powerful. So I think just setting some broad goals around, for example, something quite simple that we've just really tried to drill into, things like reader likes. Not only recommending Black authors if you're working on a Black reader like, not only recommending white authors if you're working on a book by a white author to recommend reader likes. So just each time basically trying to create as broad a collection as you possibly can is sort of the position that we're in. And also just, yeah, I mean, that is broadly the line that we're sort of taking. And it's been a really interesting piece of work for us as well, really having to think about who are we presenting here, who are we showcasing. I've talked enough now, but
that was really helpful. That was really helpful, thank you, John. And I think we always have to bear in mind it's the readers that libraries are there for. And again, like, I think the common theme has been we can't second guess readers and we shouldn't assume anything. And what we need to do is actually look at how we can expand reading rather than just keep reading it. But at the same time, as we may be aware politically, the message is very much just get people reading and keep them reading what they like, rather than actually what we're all saying, which is we need to make sure that people are reading much more diversely and pushing the barriers on what they're reading. I know that Jeremy Thompson-Smith has a question. Jeremy, would you like to ask your question to the panel?
Yes, first of all, hello everyone. I work for Somerset Libraries. I'm the outreach officer for Somerset Libraries. And before we start, I'm here because of you, Sarah. Thank you. How is it that I'm interested in diversity, welcoming, bringing people into our libraries, that I never heard of your book through a librarian, which includes me? I found out about your book through The Guardian. And now I read your book as a library book, and now we'll be recommending it individually to many of our readers that we influence. And I think the key things, I've got three elements to my question is, first of all, we need help in not about education, but entertainment. It's not about whether we are Black, whether we're part of the LGBT community. It is, as you said, Sarah, we're all one, and we need to know what's out there to recommend. It shouldn't be put into genres or types. It's available for everyone. To do that, we need help as librarians. How is it I did not know about your book through the library service? And when you spread that across the whole of the libraries in Somerset, I'm very proud of the Somerset Libraries. We are very diverse, but we have a very small, diverse community. My aim as outreach is to help entertain, educate through Black Lives Matter, through Black History Month, doing events. So where do I start? I'm one person with a population of 500,000 people, and I don't know you're out there. So my first question is, we need help to educate, to help ourselves see what is out there, see how we can not only entertain, to recommend books that we think our readers would like, but also to challenge them lovingly of books we think they might like. Give this a go. To do that, I think we need to look at, how do we know about the publishers? How do we know about the new up-and-coming Black writers that we can support? The libraries have a great opportunity to support new readers from all our communities, but we just don't know what books are out there. So that's the first question. How do we find out from the publishers of Book Love and other organisations to get that out there? Secondly, I'm trying to organise something for Black History Month within Somerset. Thankfully, because of my music interests, and I have put on diverse music events in libraries, I use my own contacts outside of libraries. I don't know what contacts there are within libraries because there's no information that I can share across our own teams. So how do we pull all this knowledge that we have, like Lucinda was talking about what books we can recommend, and pull it together to recommend as one complete library service, which may be where Library Connected comes in. We're talking about education, entertainment, and different authors. And the last question I have is, how do we reach out to an area in Somerset where there is a diverse population, but very small, who may not think the libraries are for them, because they just see the same standard books that everyone always borrows that may not feel it's for them? How do we reach out to members of our community, maybe as small communities we have in Somerset, to engage in making their libraries matter to them because it's relevant? They're my three questions.
Thank you very much, Jeremy.
Can I take that? Okay, so with all due respect, Jeremy, what you've just kind of pointed out is exactly kind of the problem. It's like, what you've just pointed out is that you're still putting it in a box. You're still like, this is diversity, it's in a box, it's Black History Month, when do we tick the box on this? When do we do, like, and the thing that I say in publishing, having been a bookseller and a completely independent person, you know, I started a bookshop in Berlin where there wasn't a new English language bookshop, and there wasn't really a supply chain, and there wasn't really a way to get my books, and no one had really done it in Berlin before, so I had to just make it up. I had to go and find out. And one of the things that I say to people in publishing a lot is that if you're not prepared to make those steps yourself to go and find out how to gain and gather the information, when your job is to specifically to give information to the public, I don't know if it's the right job. And I think that's something that people have to really look at. You might love books, you might be really interested in it, etc., but if you don't have that like drive to go and find things out yourself, and that it all has to be spoon fed to you, then how do you really give that to the readers? And as a bookseller, and I'd say this is sort of the difference between maybe being a bookseller and being a librarian, is that like, it's my responsibility at all times to ensure that my bookshop was stocked with a huge range of titles for a huge reading public. Why is my bookshop in Berlin better stocked with a diverse range of books in English? By the way, it was the only new English language bookshop in the city, in the capital of Germany. Why was 10 years ago I opened it? How could that be how could it be better than like my local library in Bristol? And I would say that's because of the curiosity of not just the supply chain, because the supply chain wasn't there, actually. I had to really figure out how to do it myself, but because of the curiosity of the people who were behind the counter, the people who were ordering. And I just think there just needs to be like a really good look at the community of librarians and like who is doing these jobs, who is ordering, because basically what you just said in a nutshell is like, why isn't there anyone helping me to do this work? I'm a good person, I want to do it, but where are the people who are helping me do it? And I'm like, You need to do it. You need to go and connect. You need to go onto Twitter. You need to, there's loads of resources. There's huge amounts of resources out there. And I would really like you to take that challenge on yourself, and not pigeonhole it as I'm looking for diverse books, but I'm looking for great books. I'm looking for great books. So the example that you gave was about Sarah's book, fantastic. You read about it in The Guardian. Great. You don't need someone else to come and tell you that this book exists. If you can find it out on The Guardian, you can find it out. And this is how, on listening to the radio, reading as broadly as possible across using the internet, we've got to be more curious, and nobody gives us the permission to be curious other than ourselves. And I just feel so strongly about that.
Could I just come back at that, Charmaine? I think you may have misunderstood my question. I am doing that as one individual, and I read lots of books recommended. My question actually is aimed at all of us as a community of libraries. I'm doing that, but it's then being able to, it needs to be us done as a community of librarians where we can share this information to other libraries and interact.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. It's like using that example of what you just said, whether it's you or someone else in this community of the hundreds of people that are listening to this. What I'm saying is that, like, there's a collective responsibility, but it starts with the individual responsibility. And essentially, I'm just looking at like a lot of the comments, and I'm just like, okay, but what can you do? Like, people look to you as a stalwart in your communities, and I don't mean you personally, Jeremy, I mean like all of you as librarians, to give them information. They're looking to you as like a beacon of curiosity and engagement and hope and brilliance. And so what an honor. Like, it's a total honor to have that position within your communities. And so my question back to all of you as librarians is like, okay, so if that's your role, how do you feel that you're fulfilling it anyway, as for all books, and looking at great books all the time for all of your readers, not just sort of honing in on this idea of like what's great for Black readers or for Black books by Black authors, because I just think it's so limiting and reductionist to kind of talk about it in these terms. And also for Black readers, for Black writers, it's actually really offensive to us as well, how reductionist this conversation can sometimes get. But I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate what you're doing, and that you have gone out to do it, like to do more work and to find things out. But let's look beyond Black History Month, all the boxes that we feel that we need to tick.
One thing that I just want to say is Libraries Connected is we've created a little part of our website where you can go and find like booktubers, you can find certain lists. And I think if we can sometimes give that diving off point, but like Charmaine said earlier on as well, I think social media is really key. And I think we have to feel less that publishing is not part of us and we're part of it, but also embed yourself in that world through social media, because then if you follow Sarah, if you follow Charmaine, if you follow Samantha, you'll start to see all these people who will naturally just give you loads of recommendations. It's one of the ways that I've got swingingly back into books at one point. Sorry, you wanted to say something.
I do also want to caution about blind spots, and I've been thinking about acknowledging my own blind spot, because a few minutes ago I talked about diversity from a Caribbean perspective, but that's because we were talking about Black authors. And I should also have said, obviously, there are all kinds of diversity issues that aren't well handled in the Caribbean, for example, LGBTQI and able-bodied versus able-bodiedness. And I think it is really important that we acknowledge that if we perpetuate this idea that you have to go seek out my book as some kind of special interest, then that just maintains the idea that there is a default, somehow there's a default proper general or universal literature, and my book is an adjunct to that or a footnote to it. I don't know. The question I was going to ask Jeremy, and thank you so much, by the way, for the compliments about the book. It actually echoes an experience I had in the back of a cab. This is a true story. I sat in the back of a taxi, and the very lovely taxi driver said, "Aren't you the lady who wrote that book? I saw it in The Guardian." So I have a lot to thank The Guardian for. But my question was going to be, I think your question was, how do we find out from the publishers who's out there in terms of Black writers? My question is going to be, how do librarians find out who is out there? How do you find out who's out there in terms of any writers? So when you're deciding to order books by the sort of white male established writers, who is feeding you that information? Because I think it must all come from the same place, surely. I'm genuinely not just interested, but bewildered as to whether or not there's a different channel for information about Black writers and Black books than there is for any other.
You're getting lots of thumbs up there, Sarah, on that point. I'm aware that we're getting close to 5 o'clock, so I just wanted to ask if you could give a quick answer on this one, Sarah, Samantha and Charmaine. What would you like to see libraries potentially doing right now to make sure that this whole conversation around diversity isn't just a moment, and that it is a movement and we keep moving it forward? That's a big question with a very short answer.
I think keeping really positive, and I think is really, really important. And as I said, I'm feeling very empowered by your position and how important we all see you as librarians. I know that some people have said that publishers don't really value libraries, and I kind of feel like in a way it sort of doesn't really matter what anyone else thinks. What matters is what your customers, what your readers think, and don't get too hung up on this idea of an industry, because it's just nonsense. But to feel very empowered by your own position within society, which the whole of the country, the whole world says how important libraries are, and taking that empowerment and, as I said, being entirely being more curious and pushing your own boundaries and pushing yourself, because I think the great thing about books is that when you find all of these different writers from a range of different backgrounds, then it's really rewarding for you as well, not just your readers, but yourself. It's really rewarding to read a range of books.
I would say the key to being a good librarian is the same as the key to being a good citizen of the world. It is recognizing that your position as a citizen of the world, recognizing it should be fueled by curiosity, that it should be motivated by a love of reading and books. I know it's work, I know it's a business. When I approach writing, I approach it one half as a kind of professional occupation, one half as passion. And I think more people involved in the publishing and distribution of books need to remember. Hopefully we came to it because we love books. We need to remember that we did. And if we're motivated genuinely by love of books, by the love of reading, and by the idea that behind that is connection and empathy and universality, then that should lead to the behavior of a good citizen of the world, which is recognizing that we all have something to contribute to the conversation. I really honestly do want to get to the point where the default position is everyone, not that the default position is whiteness or able-bodiedness or straightness, and then we are looking for deviations from that to promote a special interest, but that we recognize that the default position includes all of us, that we're not special interests or side projects. And that comes from recognizing, I think, what led us to reading in the first place, that appetite for learning, for discovery, for opening our minds, and for being good citizens of the world.
And what about you, Samantha? Oh, you're on mute.
I grew up in the Caribbean. I grew up in Barbados, and Caribbean culture, African culture was my normal. I moved back to England when I was 18 and I missed it. I missed it hugely. I missed it when I worked in television for 15 years. It wasn't there. This is why I do what I do. I'm all about pushing culture, African culture, Asian, Caribbean. It is what drives me. And if I can help librarians across the world and across the UK tap in to some of that love and some of that passion that I have, my door is open. Librarians, come. Let us work together. Let us try to improve things. I don't have a problem with Jeremy coming to me and saying, Samantha, what do you think? How can I make my library more interesting culturally? I have no problem with that. And my door is open. So please contact me and we can just have a conversation and just get some things moving.
That's a brilliant note, I think, Tanja. And I just want to thank everyone so much in the comments, in the questions, the chat, for such a brilliant, frank discussion. I think we need to keep these kind of discussions going. And I think we need to be very honest with each other and kind of test each other and see how we can help each other at the same time. So I just want to thank again Charmaine, Sarah and Samantha, and this will be available later. We'll be sharing out. I think we're going to try and save the chat too and maybe share some social media so that people have got more jumping off points. We have another of these in the series which will be on Tuesday the 15th of September around education, around race, and so hopefully we will see you all then.